Todd Lauer is an astronomer with the National Science Foundation. And, he's looking out at the vastness of space and looking at the sections in between stars and planets and asking the question, is it really as dark as it looks? And he wondered if there might be light actually coming from the universe itself. He was like, does the universe itself produce a glow? These are the kind of questions that astronomers ask that the rest of us don't really think about. But he was going, how do you even address that question? How do you even come at that? So what they decided to do, he and a team of researchers, was they piggybacked on the New Horizons spaceship, which was sent out to take pictures of Pluto, and then has kept going on beyond Pluto. So it's now 4 billion miles away from Earth. Like 4 billion, that is, I can't even conceive that. It's 50 times further away from the sun than we are. And so it's like the furthest camera away from the closest light source. So they started analyzing the most boring pictures that it was sending back, the ones with the least amount of stars. And then they took those stars and factored in how much light they were producing, and they took them out of the equation. And then they went so far as to go, all the known galaxies out there and the light that they produce, and if you took all that out of the way, and they discovered that there was still all this light there that they have no idea what the source of this light is. In fact, it is as much light apart from all the stars and galaxies as there is produced by the stars and galaxies. Isn't that incredible? And other researchers have confirmed this finding. And so there's just a tremendous amount of light out there that they don't quite know why or how it's there. And then he concluded, though, with this statement. He said, it's still pretty dark. It's still pretty dark. And I thought, wow, that feels to me like a great analogy for when we talk about light in spiritual terms, because we know that Jesus has brought so much light into the world. And yet you look around and you go, it's still pretty dark. And so how do we pair those two things together, of Jesus being the light and the world being so incredibly dark? He tells a little parable in the middle of Mark chapter 4 that it's kind of odd placement in the book, because all these parables around it are all about seeds, and then he's got this one here dropped sort of in the middle that's about light and dark. But when you look at it a little more closely, you find that it actually makes sense right where he's placed it. So let's take a look in Mark chapter 4, starting verse 21. He, meaning Jesus, said to them, "Do you bring a lamp to put it under a bowl or a bed? Instead, don't you put it on its stand? For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear." That little phrase there at the end kind of tells you that there's something more going on here than just the surface listening to it. Like, you kind of really have to be paying attention to get what he's getting at. And I think that's especially true with this parable. When translators go to bring a text from one language to another, they're always making judgment calls. And we're looking at the New International Version here, and they usually do a really great job. I like the way that they make it pretty readable, instead of, some thoughts just don't translate directly from one language the same way into another. But But in this particular case, they kind of lost a little bit that I think the original carries for us. Because when I interpret this, and again, I'm going back to my childhood, being in the church and singing the song, "This Little Light of Mine," right? Some of you know, some of you even not in church heard that song. I'm gonna let it shine, hide it under a bushel. No, that there's so much of that idea of holding your light out into the world and shining it, but that's not how Mark presents this text here for us. So here's how this translation puts it. If we were to look at a more literal rendering of the Greek, this is how it would read. And you can see why they made their change, because it's a little more natural reading. But look at this, because I think it helps. And he said to them, "Does the light come in order to be put under the bowl or under the couch? Not that it may be put on the lampstand." Okay, so you can hear that's a little awkward, because normally you don't think of light having its own agency, that it's arriving on its own. You bring the light is normally how we think of it, but that's not how Mark words it. He's talking about light coming on its own, and notice that he also puts a definite article in front of it. It's the light. Does the light come in order to be put under the bowl or under the couch? Well, you start talking about the light coming, and that makes you think of Jesus saying, "I am the light of the world," right? And so this passage, to me, that's encouraging, because it means this passage is not really Jesus telling us what to do, of like, let your light shine out there. He's telling us what we can expect of him as the light of the world. And so that makes sense then in this context, right? Where we've been talking about Jesus is describing that he's using all these parables that some people can understand and some people can't. And yet right here he says, look, the light does not come to be hidden, right? So he's reassuring people, my point in coming as the light is to bring revelation, to bring clarity, to enlighten the world. And so that to me is highly encouraging of Jesus saying what we can expect of him. And I think the first thing that we can expect from him is that light is meant to give light. Not a real profound insight there maybe, but he said, he made the point, he said whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open. So I find this an encouraging thought, because when Jesus says, I've come into the world as a light, it's so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. So Jesus has that idea in mind when he's talking about being the light. And I think what I want to say is you have all the permission in the world to want more light in your life, to expect that if Jesus is the light, that he will reveal more of himself to you. That's an okay thing to ask for. And to expect, because that's what he came for. And yet, the truth is that light may be hidden for a time, right? Because if something is hidden that's going to be revealed, or concealed that's going to be brought into the light, then there is a period in which the light may not be totally visible to us. And we all know that, right? We all have had periods, maybe right now, where things just feel really dark. Flannery O'Connor, back in the 50s, said, right now the whole world seems to be going through a dark night of the soul. And if she could say that 75 years ago, I think it's probably safe to say the same thing today for us, that it does feel like Job, where when I looked for light, then came the darkness. Maybe you are looking around and you're going, it sure seems like it's still pretty dark, right? it still feels like the world is a dark place. And sometimes that hidden quality of the light is God's strategic way of dealing with the darkness. You think about the story of Gideon when he went up against the Midianites. That's the encampment of the Midianites down there on the bottom. Those are tents in the valley there. And Gideon's army got whittled down to just 300 people that are going to take on this vast army that is just endless, filling this valley, and they don't know how they're going to do it. And God takes them up into the hills, and Gideon has all of his men carrying these jars. That inside the jars are these torches, that the light is hidden, and then at just the right moment, Gideon gives the command, and they break the jars, and then suddenly the light is visible, and it becomes this very strategic moment in the battle of how God operates against the darkness. And sometimes that is true, that is a reality of light being hidden, is that it's part of the long-term strategy of when it's revealed, that it then will be used by God in a powerful way. But the reality is that hidden light just feels like absence. When you can't see the light, you go, well, what good is it? And it's back to Jesus' question: why have a light if you're going to put it, if you're not going to let it shine? And yet there is so much that feels like it obscures the lights. It's just, it's this, the very simple idea of the weather we've been having. Day 45 of January, it's just been so gloomy. We were at a restaurant the other day, and the waiter told us that this isn't quite dark enough for him because he grew up in the San Juan Islands, and he likes it even cloudier than we've had it. And I'm a Washington native. I like a cloudy day as much as anybody, but anyway, but when it is cloudy for a long period of time, nobody cares that if you got above the clouds you could see the sun, right? It feels like it's just not there. And so hidden light just feels like absence. And I think there are a number of ways where light feels absent. It feels absent when the suffering is unfathomable when we look around, and we can't come up with any comprehensible reason for the suffering. Or the light feels absent when there's no intervention. There's nobody. God's not doing anything. We desperately feel like He needs to do something to stop it, and it's not happening. Or our prayers go unanswered, and we're begging God to do something. We can't seem to see where we're going. We were talking about this in the young guys group on Thursday of that sense sometimes of just feeling like I don't know where the path is that God's supposedly leading me on. I can't see it. Or when the grief is inconsolable, it's just too heavy, and it feels like you've been abandoned. Or you just feel utterly alone. Those are some of the thoughts that came to mind for me of when it feels like the light is hidden. Are there others, I'm curious, that make it feel that way to you, or is there one of those that feels especially relatable? Any others come to mind?
Sometimes it feels kind of hopeless.
Feels hopeless. Yeah.
It's when I'm trying to interpret the culture and the changes around me. I don't have the light to see correctly.
Yeah.
Or just not correctly, but to even get,
Yes.
how I should be, or how I should be parenting or whatever.
Yeah. Keeping when you don't have the wisdom to keep up with all the rapidly changing things. Yeah, Doreen.
It just seems once. And
Yes.
it goes forever and ever and ever.
Yes. Just keeps going. The relentlessness of everything. Yes, Andy.
To tag on to Heather, when you don't have clarity.
Yeah.
You're not able to see anything clearly enough to even know where to go, what to do. It just feels very foggy.
Yes. Yes. Feels foggy. Yeah, all those times. And when I preached through this passage last time back in 2018, I think I jumped off of this too quickly and tried to rationalize for God a bit too quickly. And the reality is there are just times when we can't see it. We can't see the light, and there's not a good enough explanation. There's no amount of putting a reason on it is going to make it feel better. And sometimes we're left in the dark about the darkness. And I think that's okay to sit with that and not try to make something up that's going to be good enough, because I don't think that honors the depth of just how dark it feels sometimes. Even Scripture itself speaks to that. Psalm 30 says, "When you hid your face, I was dismayed." That means I was terrified. I was disturbed. I was really upset by that. So hidden light feels like absence, and that's the honest reality of it. If there's an answer to it, it's not in explaining it, but by reminding us that light experienced darkness too. In a very literal way, Christ experienced darkness. Mark tells us about his crucifixion and says at noon, darkness came over the whole land. Literal darkness settled over the land until 3 p.m. And at 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That's Jesus stepping into the ultimate of human darkness. And here he is, the light of the world, feeling the full weight of darkness himself, taking that on our behalf. And that was preordained that would be his experience. Hundreds of years earlier, the prophet Amos spoke to that and said, "In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. I will make that time like morning for an only son, and the end of it like a bitter day." Jesus stepped in and experienced all that darkness on our behalf. I've been reading a really beautiful book lately called "A Quiet Mind to Suffer With" by John Andrew Bryant. And I want to read you this quote from there, and then I just want to pause and let you respond and interact with the quote, because I think it's so good. He said, speaking of Jesus' death, he said, "Jesus kept the scars and decided to stay in heaven as the Christ who died. And when he did that, he took the crucifixion and with it all of human pain, everything that could be seen and felt and done and taken, into the throne room of God. What's wrong and what happened, those two categories of things, were allowed into the throne room of God. They were, in fact, ushered in with singing. History and affliction in this way were overcome, but not removed, neither repressed nor corrected. History and affliction were rather consecrated. They were still somehow there, kept by the scars, still in heaven, but they were made something else. They were made holy." I just think that's such a powerful way of looking at what Jesus did with human pain. And I just wanted to see if you had any reactions or thoughts that sparked for you.
how is the reaction then?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a powerful thought that Jesus collected all the unthinkable and brought it before God and turned it into something else.
Well, here on earth, Jesus wept over Jerusalem. He wept at Lazarus.
Yeah.
So he felt the whole.
He felt it all.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's a beautiful picture.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Well, the good thing is that in addition to light experiencing darkness, we can hold on to the hope that light will, in fact, have its day. That is our ultimate hope, that there will be an end to the darkness. So if we go back through Jesus' history, you think back to the prophets predicting Jesus coming. And the prophecies are put out there, and it's really dark. They can't really fully see what it's going to be like when Jesus arrives. They have some vague thoughts around it, but it's not totally made known to them. So they're putting these out there in the dark. And then the birth of Christ, and the light has come. Right? We talked about that at Christmas Eve even, that the light had come. And so there's this glory of his arrival. And then it goes into his youth. And we are left in the dark about what happened there's not this immediate introduction of salvation when Jesus is born. There's this period of time where things go quiet and we don't know what happened then. And then there's his ministry, which is full of miracles and healing and this amazing teaching and all of this that is a revelation of more glory. And then there's his death. And as Jesus talked about in the parable last week, it was that kernel of wheat falling into the ground and being buried, being covered over, not being visible. And so here everything again feels really dark. And then he rises, and it's glorious, and we'll celebrate that here very soon at Easter. And so it's amazing that Jesus conquered death and sin, and then he ascended into heaven, and we've been somewhat in the dark in this space in between ever since, where we can't see him and we can't see the future, and we have all these things where we're going, it's still pretty dark. But then he's going to return. And when he returns is when the full beauty of full daylight comes into being. And the book of Revelation talks about this. And it's talking about the New Jerusalem and says, the city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light. And the Lamb is its lamp. And then in the next chapter it says, there will be no more night. Hallelujah. No more darkness at that point. There is actually going to be an end to it all. And that's what we have to hold on to, that this isn't all there is. There is more coming, and it's going to be good beyond measure. And so we know that light will, in fact, have its day. And the truth is here in this meantime, where we are still in the darkness, is that reflected light matters. This is where it gets back to this little light of mine. I'm going to let it shine, because we have the opportunity to take the light that we have received, the light that has experienced darkness on our behalf, and to bring that to the world. There's a little town in Norway called Rjukan that sits right in this deep, deep valley between these two mountains. And it's such a deep valley that for 6 months out of the year, the town is in the darkness of shadow. It doesn't receive any sunlight down in this valley. It's really, really depressing for the people living there. So 100 years ago, an engineer was trying to solve this problem, and he built a cable car up to the top of the mountain to just get people up higher so they could catch a glimpse of the sun now and then. But finally, an artist moved to this town and found it too dark, and he convinced the city to fund building these giant mirrors on top of this mountain at the cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And these mirrors don't just sit there, they also rotate every 10 minutes as the sun progresses across the sky to catch the sun and reflect it down into the city. And so people can now come down into this town square and look up and see the light as it's reflected and bounced down to them. I thought, what a great, great picture. That, there are so many people that are in really deep valleys right now. And they can't see Jesus, but they can see you. And you and I have an opportunity to be that reflection, to be those mirrors. And Christ has placed us strategically at the tops of mountains in different people's lives to be able to reflect him to them. Paul wrote, and he said, "And we who with unveiled faces all reflect the Lord's glory." Every one of us reflects the Lord's glory. We're being transformed into his likeness with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. This is what he was talking about when he said that, the mystery that had been hidden for ages that was revealed. So what Christ was talking about, what's hidden is going to be revealed, is the mystery is Christ in you, the hope of glory. That is this mystery that he can put his light in each one of us and have it be the hope of glory, not only for us, but for other people around us. And I think about Moses, who this passage there is referring to with the unveiled face. Moses didn't even know that his face was glowing after having been with the Lord, and so he had to cover it up because it was too shiny. But I don't think we are even aware of how much opportunity we have to reflect the Lord's glory. It's not something that I think we're always even conscious of in that way. But it's there. It's present. And Paul says here it's ever increasing. And so, like those mirrors, that means a combination of positioning ourselves in a way that we're receiving that light from him, and also that we're in connection with people, that the light is reaching them as well. Ephesians 5 says, "Live as children of light, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness." Sometimes it's hard to know, well, how can I look like light in the world? What does that even mean for me? And am I, do I have it in me to always be cheerful and sunny, or whatever our vision of light is in the world? But I like this verse because it gives us this baseline of saying, well, for starters, just have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness. That's one thing that we can grab onto and go, I'm at least not going to do that. I like the old line from the Indigo Girls song that said, "I will not be a pawn for the Prince of Darkness any longer." And making that commitment to say, you know what? I'm at least not going to be dark. I may not know how to be light, but I'm not going to be dark. I'm not going to contribute to somebody else's shame. I'm not going to take part in the gossip. I'm not going to add to the divisiveness. I'm not going to be selfish. We can think of the things that we can refrain from being, and that in itself contributes to the light. Proverbs 4 says, "The path of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn, shining brighter till the full light of day." we're just the little glimmers of the first rays of sunlight, but it's getting brighter, and it can get brighter because we have with us the light that's experienced darkness. So even when we're experiencing darkness ourselves, we have Jesus with us, and so other people can see us experiencing our darkness with him and the difference that makes. Amen. God, I thank you for the reality that your way of addressing darkness, even when it's hidden to us, is by being someone acquainted with grief, being someone who stepped in and experienced all the darkness firsthand. And so we know that you are sympathetic. And Lord, I pray for each person here today who is experiencing in some way the realities of this world that we're in that's so broken and so full of evil and wickedness and mayhem and chaos that we can't break free of it and escape it, and it seems accelerating, and yet your light is growing as well. Help us to hold on to the light we've received and to reflect it more and more. God, take away all that's obscuring your light in us, and we give you praise. Amen.